Mark Rogers TV, just a few minutes after LSU came all the way back from 24-7 to down Wisconsin 28-24 at Reliance Stadium. And this is the reason why I've talked about this game the entire offseason, and anytime I was asked, said this is the game that I wanted to see in week one. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't captivating in terms of matchups. It wasn't like one style versus another. It was the same style. I just knew that they would lock horns and that they would gut it out. And even though LSU had the superior talent by far, that Wisconsin would gut it out and compete like they always do against the better teams, and that it would be a war and a battle all the way down to the end. And I got what I expected. And if you really broke down this game, if we would go back through the videotape and look at play-by-play and said, okay, who won this play? Boom. Wisconsin, LSU. If we marked every play, I guarantee you that Wisconsin won 70% of the plays. But they didn't win the big plays. They won the 5-yarders. They won the 1-yard losses. They won the no-gainers. They won the majority of plays. They outplayed LSU basically from the first drive all the way late to the third quarter, mid-third quarter. But LSU came in waves. The athletes came in waves when they got it kicked into gear, when Jennings started to find his rhythm on offense, and when the defense really sold out on the run and figured, hey, they can't do anything about passing the football on us. They can't separate. We know what we need to do. We need to stop the running backs in the running game of Wisconsin. And then it was all over. Wisconsin just caved in, and not due to lack of effort. When I talk about caving in, the momentum was all in LSU's favor, and the athleticism and speed mostly in its favor, and Wisconsin lost this one again. 24-7 lead goes to 28-24 for the Bayou Bengals, who has still not lost. They've lost bowl games, but they've not lost a regular season non-conference game since way back in 2001 against Virginia Tech. So just a few notes that I jotted down here and would like to go through. So let's start with the rushing game, because it all starts and ends there with Wisconsin. They led in rushing yardage going into the fourth quarter, 256 to 49 to LSU. So Wisconsin was dominating the line of scrimmage. And their backs, most notably Melvin Gordon, of course, maybe the best back in the nation. I would rate him and have rated him in the top 3. Was having his way. He totaled 16 carries for $110 against LSU. So he had an outstanding game. And again, 256 to 49 through 3 quarters. Wisconsin was stopping the run as well. LSU, Terrence McGee, Kenny Hilliard getting nothing done. Leonard Fournette, the much ballyhooed freshman, he will have much better days in the future. He barely could break the line of scrimmage. 8 carries for 18 yards. And then all of a sudden, LSU kicked in with a running game. We've got to credit LSU. We also have to note that Wisconsin's 2 interior defensive tackles, Warren Herring, who is by far their best defensive tackle, 4 sacks last season, and Conrad Zagzebski, senior defensive end, also lost. And as soon as Herring went out, boy, I don't know if that was just coincidence, if LSU was going to take over that game anyway, but just in terms of the ground game, they started to rip gashes through that Badgers defense early in the fourth quarter, and that was part of the big plays. Wisconsin could not stop the running game in the last 10 or 12 minutes of that football game. Then it comes down to the play of Anthony Jennings. He didn't win this game, but he did not lose the game. So he played okay in the first half, didn't cough up the football. Then he really started to deliver some throws in the last 20 minutes of game time. 9 of 21, that's not important. 238 yards. He got 238 yards off of 9 completions. The big one up top to Trayvon Durrell, who caught 3 for 151 and a touchdown. The one guy coming back from last year's receiving corps who had any type of productivity, not a whole lot, with Beckham Jr. and Landry doing everything for LSU last season. But Doral was the one guy that Les Miles has talked about in the offseason that he could count on, that he knew was a somewhat proven commodity, and he came up with a big play to make it 10-7, and then a couple catches in the second half when LSU made the big comeback. So Anthony Jennings, I think he played well. He took care of the football. Again, 2 touchdowns, no picks, 9 of 21, not impressive, but big yardage. That's more important sometimes than completion percentage, 238 yards. Brandon Harris came into the game, just ran the ball a little bit. On the flip side, for Wisconsin, what hurts the Badgers is that they don't have playmakers on the outside. They had Jared Abbrederis for the last umpteen years, it seemed, but the last 3 or 4, and he was the guy making 60 to 80 catches a year. They get the tight end involved. They've had some good tight ends, NFL tight ends at Wisconsin, but in terms of establishing quality wide receivers, game changers, playmakers, dynamic players on the outside, Wisconsin doesn't have it. They've had it with Abbrederis, period. Didn't have a second or third option outside. This team may not have it, period. They could do nothing. They threw for 50 yards in this game. How did they hang with LSU? Throwing 8 of 24, Tanner McAvoy, and I don't think it was his fault. He had no chance, no separation by the wide receivers. He was either running for his life, backpedaling, throwing the ball out of bounds, or his wide receivers could not get separation. 8 of 24, 2 picks. Those were poorly thrown balls, but he was just trying to make something happen. And again, 50 yards passing. Longest pass play, 14 yards for Wisconsin. So we see it again. We saw it in the Capital One Bowl last year. Wisconsin ran it down the throats of Kelsey Quarles and Chaz Sutton and Jadeveon Clowney, and an NFL caliber front 7 defense for South Carolina for 360 yards rushing against South Carolina in the Capital One Bowl. But they made mistakes in the red zone passing the football. Kurt Phillips, crucial pick late in the fourth quarter when Wisconsin was going for the lead again against South Carolina, and we saw the same thing in this game. Quarterback and lack of playmakers on the outside distinguishes Wisconsin as a very, very strong top 15 program, but not competing for national championships because they miss those 2 pieces. That's basically what they miss. They will constantly compete with the best teams in the country, but compete and typically lose 70-75% of the time with the upper echelon teams. And maybe LSU's not even an upper echelon team as far as it goes to the SEC this season. We will see the season play out. But LSU with Anthony Jennings possibly coming of age, that could be a huge sign for them. Again, Fournette, 8 carries, 18 yards. The Wisconsin punting game really killed them during the LSU comeback. They had 3 punts of 23, 25, and 26 yards when they were controlling the game, but the LSU defense was starting to clamp down. They would have to punt it away, 23, 25, 26 yards. You're talking about like 15 to 20 yards that they were not receiving in the return game on the exchange of field position that they should have had from Drew Meyer, their punter. Poor job there by the Wisconsin Badgers. Of course, Jalen Mills had the big interception with 11 minutes left, down 24-21. That turned into the big John Darce play when Jennings just nailed him, bam, in stride. Darce turns around, sheds defenders, just a big, strong kid running to the end zone. Wisconsin defensive backs couldn't handle him. He runs in for the touchdown, and LSU had its first lead of the game. Melvin Gordon ripping up the LSU defense. 16 carries for 110 yards. 3 carries in the second half. We saw nothing noticeably wrong with Melvin Gordon. What happened? Why was he not in the game? Wisconsin's best player, certainly their best offensive player. You know what? Their best player, their best talent, the guy that could scare, the only guy on that offense that could scare the LSU defense, that was ripping them up. 3 carries in the second half. There must have been something. I'm hoping, not that I'm hoping something's wrong with Melvin Gordon, but in regards to play calling, I'm thinking that there had to be something wrong with Melvin Gordon. Otherwise, there has to be a serious explanation out of the mouth of Gary Anderson on that. Again, I am amazed with Wisconsin's ability to compete with the best teams in the country. And again, we're not saying LSU's right near the top right this second, but in regards to a program, they're one of the 5 best in the last 10 to 15 years. Top 5 recruiting classes for LSU over and over and over and over. Think about that. Top 5 recruiting classes, and we saw it when they came back. We saw the waves of athletes. Okay, for Wisconsin, they recruit like top 35 or 40 classes. For them to compete, go to 3 consecutive Rose Bowls, compete and go to top games, play South Carolina down to a final possession. That game went to the last 4 or 5 minutes, and compete with that kind of talent. I think it's a credit to the Wisconsin program. They lose more than they win of these games, but they always compete. Let's keep in mind, against the SEC, in the last 7 or 8 seasons, okay, they lost this one against an LSU team that's considered top 15 in the country. We shall see. 28-24 goes down to the last possession. Last season, they lost 34-24, late touchdown by South Carolina. That game went down to the last 4 or 5 minutes, tore them up on the ground. Again, they lost that one to a team that finished 4th in the country. Then you've got to go back to 05, 6, and 7. Wisconsin beat Auburn 24-10, a team that was a top 10 team, the Auburn Tigers. They beat the Darren McFadden, Felix Jones, Arkansas Razorbacks 17-14 in the Cap One Bowl in Brett Bielema's first year. And that Arkansas team was a top 10 or 12 team. Tennessee the next season. Both teams were ranked top 15, top 20, comparable matchup. In the Outback Bowl, Tennessee won that one 21-17. So 2 wins, then 3 losses. The last 3 times they've matched up with the SEC, those are losses against Tennessee, South Carolina, and LSU, all by basically down to the wire, 1 possession. So Wisconsin, I don't know if they can ever get over this hump. They don't have the recruits in their backyard to be able to pull it off. They've got to go to Florida. They've got to do some other things, and they have been able to do that. And again, credit to them, building a top 15 program. But to compete for a national championship, like Melvin Gordon talked about in the offseason, there have to be some changes with this Wisconsin offense. They tried to provide that with Tanner McAvoy, who played safety last year and who can move and run, but he's just not dynamic, game-changing. For LSU, great win. The Mad Hatter was back at it with the fake punt down 24-7. It could have been disastrous, but they got it by a yard, and it turned things around. Now LSU's got some cake games, and then they dive into the SEC Western Division, along with the game against Florida in the Eastern Division. So we will see how good LSU is to compete with Bama, Auburn, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and wow, look at Texas A&M on opening night. Would love to hear what you have to say, whether it's Badger fans, Big Ten fans talking about the Big Ten's quest to get better. They had a pretty good weekend, or the SEC, the king of the hill right now, and how good is LSU in competing in the Western Division. Let's talk it up right here on Mark Rogers TV.